there's really two sort of major projects that we feel that people have to work on. At least I think, and that we try and do in the context of this show, which is, to push back against the rising authoritarianism, to pressure and expose the failure of the Democratic leadership and, the support structure around a lot of that Democratic leadership thought, and show how wrong they are, and in many instances, hope to push them out of the leadership, et cetera. Came across, I actually watched some of this, and it was painful to watch Ross Douthat and Ezra Klein have a conversation. They're both smart people when they want to be. And then there are other times where their smartness is, how do I walk a certain a line here and appeal to the constituencies that I want to?
Yeah, a bit of a rebrand from him that is been taking place over the entire calendar year of 2025. Ezra Klein, who I
don't think it's a rebrand. Yeah, I think
okay,
you're just
but to the layman, people they think he's a liberal, okay, because he's positioned himself as such. He has NPR voice. He's got a beard or something. I don't really get it, but that's what he's been associated with the Democratic Party. But he's actually trying to stake out the new center, which is the whole abundance effort, including this fluff piece about Charlie Kirk's life, including...
That didn't cite anything from Charlie Kirk himself.
No words of his, including his conversation with Ben Shapiro, that is, I think Shapiro is looking to find new allies, given the Daily Wire's financial situation and the fact that the right is becoming increasingly anti-Israel, especially online, the young Republicans, not the older ones. So I think that there's a very, very lucrative market, and it's always people around 40 years old when they're like, all right, it's time for me. I've been doing this for a while, whatever. I mean, in 10 years, if I'm doing this, you can call me out on it. I've been doing this for a while, but it's time for me to cash in. And the easiest way to cash in is to be a liberal that's on the center now and having conversations with Ben Shapiro and all that stuff.
He's cashed in a long time ago. I mean, he made a ton of money selling Vox and
Paul Ryan.
There's always more.
Yes, but he was, this is the thing that people forget this. He was a champion of Paul Ryan. I disagree with Paul Ryan, but he's a serious individual. Paul Ryan was never a serious individual. It was always a joke. And so this is a role that Klein has had. I don't think Klein is going through a rebrand. I think what is happening is that the ground is shifting underneath him. He is staying exactly where he has been, which is always to give credence for certain sort of center right economic policies, or centrist, however you want to describe it. But the ground is shifting underneath him, and I think that is what's going on.
That's who he was. The average person, he's now making overtures publicly to appeal to that time.
Listen, at that time, he was also publicly praising Paul Ryan. And it just didn't have the reaction. The ground is shifted, and he doesn't really realize it, and he's caught. And here is a clip of him and him and Ross Douthat. And Ezra is talking about this moment in Democrat. And then what happens, there were two things I found fascinating about this. One is, this is the argument that I was having with Ezra Klein, that I wanted to have with him. Not the specifics of the housing situation in San Francisco, which, he had written a couple essays on, because I don't know about the housing situation in San Francisco. I wanted to have the more general conversation of what is impacting our politics, and listen to the way he frames this. This is fascinating.
As a book. And it created so much energy, which is more than I thought it was going to create.
Go back a little bit so that we can hear him say, go back just a hair here, because he's basically talking about why Abundance as a book made such a splash. And we should be clear, it did very, very well. We should also be clear that Tech Money put $120 million into branding stuff abundance.
Abundance Fest. They had a festival. It wasn't a grassroots. It didn't come out of like the grassroots. It was top down funded by rich guys. That's the problem here.
And I'm sure his book was both helped by that, but also helped encourage that type of investment. And so, all credit due. But let's not pretend that this was some type of popular sort of like coalescing around these ideas. I'm sorry, that is not the case, but go ahead.
After you lose an election like that, if you tell yourself it's existential and you lose, then it's not even clear how you return to sort of normal political alarm in that environment.
I think there's that. I think the loss of 2024 shattered the Democratic Party's confidence in its own politics. Yeah. And I just don't think that the new leadership, the new ideas have yet emerged. I mean,
pause it for 1 second. I did keep it up there. Understand, like, he didn't define exactly what politics were shattered.
And then there was
like to us, what we see is like Chuck Schumer's politics, like Harris's politics of avoiding engaging in the things, the politics that came out of the DNC convention and lasted through the campaign, as opposed to the politics of Tim Walz, right? I mean, that's what we think lost, but he's not saying anything specific. It's just a like democratic, and I think he maintains this vagueness so that at different times in the course of the conversation that he's having, and I don't mean just in this specific one, he's able to shift as to what that is. All right, go ahead.
It's what a salesman would do.
Did as well as it did as a book. And it created so much energy, which was more than I thought it was going to create, is because it dropped into a void. Here's the way I am thinking about where the Democratic Party is right now. There is a debate between, on the policy side, a liberal vision of policymaking and a populist version of policymaking and power, right? It's a problem that...
Pause it for a second. Pause it. Just think about this. He is conflating, he's saying on the policy side, there's a liberal version of policymaking and a populist vision of policymaking and power. Like, there's a lot of things are very, he's keeping things very nebulous here by saying, wait, are you talking about a theory of change? Are you talking about an assessment of power? Or are you just saying how we go about making policy? Because
it's not very fucking granular.
Well, yeah, he's being vague on purpose because he wants to jam some stuff together. Go ahead.
The government isn't able to deliver, and our capacity.
No. Go back. I'm sorry.
I think Abundance did as well as it did as a book, and it created so much energy, which was more than I thought it was going to create, is because it dropped into a void. Here's the way I am thinking about where the Democratic Party is right now. There is a debate between, on the policy side, a liberal vision of policymaking and a populist version of policymaking and power, right? It's a problem that the government isn't able to deliver, and our capacity, the state capacity is weakened, or it's a problem just that we have oligarchy and corporate power. And if you could smash that oligarchy and smash the corporate power, we'd be able to do all the things we promise people, right? Then there's a split on politics.
Pause it right there. Okay. You understand that's the same thing.
Exactly.
You understand that's the same thing. Like, in one hand, he's saying, do we have a limited number of, well, it's the same thing because he's not being specific about something.
Yeah. Why is it?
Government does not exist in a vacuum. Government's ability to do things does not exist in a vacuum. Government power and capacity does not exist in a vacuum. We certainly have the shovels. We have the money, access to the money. We have the tanks. We have whatever it is we need. But something's inhibiting it. But he just says, is it a story of limited government capacity, or is it a story of like oligarchs are working on government? Well, that's the same thing. What he's not answering is, what is the limiting factor in his ideology? And he's not mentioning it because, of course, it's unions, it's environmentalists, it's poor people demanding like no asthma in these buildings and whatnot. And so it really isn't a question of whether state has capacity or not capacity, to the extent that in the populist version, the story goes that state capacity is limited because of wealthy interests that inhibit the government's capacity. Now, he pretends like they just are interested in a voodoo thing, but in his story, there are other sort of like inhibitors of government capacity. But continue. And
I just want to add, please, like that the what he's saying there about how we filled a void with abundance, the book that we know had, and the festival that came with it that had significant financial backing, is a deliberate way to steer the conversation from what has actually filled the void of an anemic Democratic Party leadership, of a party leadership that no one respects or listens to. And that has been the things like the Fight Oligarchy tour and folks like Zoran Mamdani's campaign, and even a guy like Chris Van Hollen going and actually doing politics, going down to El Salvador. He's trying to rewrite the narrative about what has filled the void in the wake of the Trump administration 2.0.
There was a void of like, what's the establishment answer? There was none. I mean, that is
in 2020.
He did fill a void. It was just a narrower set of. It was a narrower, like sort of like silo that was empty. There was no sort of like DLC. There was no blue. They filled that void.
Abundance is really. I've always looked at it as they saw what happened in 2020, which is Democrats got back into power, but there was no real thing from the center, so they had to start taking ideas from like Elizabeth Warren and the populists about like the Build Back Better stuff. And it wasn't, and they didn't until they like watered it down by going bipartisan. They had to do that because like if they wouldn't have went bipartisan, they would have just put the left's agenda. Despite the left being fairly weak at this moment in history, there's nothing else there from the center. They need to provide something.
Great point.
All right.
Or the government isn't able to deliver, and our capacity, the state capacity is weakened, or it's the problem is that we have oligarchy and corporate power. And if you could smash that oligarchy and smash that corporate power, we'd be able to do all the things we promised people, right? Then there's a split on politics. And this is the one where we sort of jumped over, I think, a reckoning that's going to have to happen at some point. My gloss on what went wrong is two things. Liberalism became a political movement that didn't deliver. When you elected liberals in different places, Democrats in different places, they didn't deliver change in your life. The outcomes were not good enough, not under Biden, not in California under Gavin Newsom, or in New York under Andrew Cuomo, or in Illinois. And I think this was actually more salient in terms of how much power got ceded to the right.
And that was just to pause on that first point. And I think an interesting note that I think you would agree with, right, is that failure was obscured to some extent by the fact that the people who experienced that as failure moved away. Right. So it's not like liberalism seemed to fail in these states.
Pause it for a second. Okay, this is where it all gets derailed because Klein has his agenda, Dothout has his, and neither one of them are as smart as they think each other is. And so then it just like it goes sideways here. Just let it play out a little bit, but just watch how sort of like Dothout is now saying, oh, the failure of liberalism to deliver. And Klein is saying broadly, Dothout's talking about California is obscured because all the critics moved to Arizona or something, or to Nevada. And Klein's like, oh, no, that misses the point. Go ahead.
You're moved away. Right. So it's not like liberalism seemed to fail in these states without losing power. Right. It's not like California is about to become Republican, or New York State, or Illinois. Right. It's just that people moved to other states. And so the problem became sort of invisible to Democratic leaders in those states who kept winning elections.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure it was invisible to them, but nevertheless, I think your point that a lot of people who were failed worse by the growing unaffordability in these states were able to move away. But the other thing is that liberals became the people who didn't like you. That they became the people, and I've seen this a lot on the Abundance Tour and going on podcasts, that, you know, people now associate as sort of like the manosphere, and like the deep sense that liberals didn't like them. Liberals became censorious. They became
the people who knew all better. This garbage. Nobody's more condescending. Maybe Klein and I have can have a competition in being condescending, but I'm sorry. To take likability lessons, I just don't think that they're coming from this guy. The fact of the matter is, we had inflation that alienated whatever it is, 15% of the population to that they were going to decide their vote upon. And then we also had Democrats, activist class, at the least, who were completely demoralized by the abject failure of the Harris campaign to signal even the slightest bit that they were going to deviate from Biden's genocidal policy in terms of Israel and Gaza. But putting that aside, the part about they didn't deliver, and the part that Klein does not answer as to like why. It's not like there's government just decides they're not going to do anything. The why is because there are factors. Sam Bagenstos, who has been a guest on this program a couple of times, now a University of Michigan Law School professor, wrote a paper. I'm just going to read part of the abstract, because it's about why didn't the huge benefits that were provided during COVID. People got free health care. I mean, granted, it was paid through COBRA, but if you're receiving that health care and you lost your job and it's free, it's free. People had extended unemployment benefits. We pulled 45% of children out of poverty in a year because of $3,600, $300 a month paid to families directly per child. We had a whole host of benefits that were rolled out for people, and yet it didn't seem to have any type of like the political salience that many people anticipated it would. And this is what he wrote. And he talks about how not only did Biden lose, but we have lost all of these things have been unraveled over the course of particularly like healthcare coverage. That's not what the drafters of the COVID era expansions thought would happen. Rather, they thought people would come to rely on and appreciate the new benefits. That's probably why Nancy Pelosi was so terrified of expanding Medicare, as opposed to just using COBRA. That reliance,
much more inefficient. Yeah.
That reliance and appreciation, they believed, would lead people to resist any efforts to roll them back, and would lead Congress, out of a fear of popular backlash, to extend the expansions and eventually make them permanent. And the drafters of the expansions did not come into those ideas unthinkingly. Those ideas have informed the domestic policy priorities of the Democratic Party for years now. They explicitly draw on a long line of work in political science that demonstrated or seemed to demonstrate the durability of benefit expansions, and even as universal protections. But here's the money shot. Those who thought the COVID era expansions would be durable relied on a particular story that drew on decades of work in political science, that new policies make new politics, and that new benefits in particular create constituencies for those benefits who resist rollbacks. But the COVID experience shows that this story misses some important points. It treats the cost imposed by an expansion of cash or health benefits as diffused. In parentheses, basically just the cost of taxation to pay for new benefits spread across the population. It thus ignores the way that powerful economic actors can see new benefits programs as a particular focused threat to their economic and workplace hegemony, a view that employers expressed and acted upon during the COVID benefits expansion. And the policies make politics story thus also ignores the need to build up the political power of those with an interest in defending benefits expansions. Beneficiaries may have an incentive to defend benefit expansions, but the COVID experience raises serious questions as to whether those expansions can be durable if we first do not attend to imbalances of political power. In other words, this research paper shows that the reason why these expansions and benefits during COVID were not as politically sticky and valued by people was because employers and big money to interest attack these benefits in a myriad ways, whether it is COVID, shots, keeping people out of work. This is all control. Like, they literally manufactured dissent to policies that were benefiting people on other grounds. Like, all the people you heard, like, we got to get the kids back into the schools and, teachers unions are the problems. And all of that were expenditures by employers and capital that was afraid these expansion of these benefits would empower people beyond where capital, employers, management, however you want to regard them, because it's empowering people too much. They can leave their job when they want to, that they're going and demanding higher wages. I mean, this was the threat, and it was met by these cohorts. And so the stickiness and the enjoyment of these benefits was not strong enough and did not have time to grow because of the environment by concentrated wealth in making sure that they were going to interfere in that relationship between the benefits and people.
It was met with a full court press of no one wants to work anymore.
Exactly. And how did corporate America respond to when the child tax credit was rolled back and expired, and Manchin helped kill it? They responded with what we saw in greedflation, where they artificially kept prices high, many of these sectors, and took home record returns, according to their earnings statements. That was their attempt to return the balance of power back in their favor, because we did see wages increase over that time period, but they were outpaced dramatically by corporate profits, which were taken home by people at the very top. So it was almost a disciplinary action, I would argue, to an attempt at social progress, where they politically punished the Biden administration in many ways, too, for some of their antitrust enforcement and some of what they were talking about with the expansion of the social safety net if they were to have made the child tax credit permanent. And Biden just doesn't have the politics or the gumption or the planning, because of what Matt was saying earlier about how, Warren the reason we have lean econ because Warren's politics filled the void because the center wasn't prepared for this kind of thing. But Biden just wasn't the kind of politician who could have wielded the hammer in a way that would have made this permanent.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously the biggest failure was in the negotiations around Manchin and Sinema and opening the door there. But what we also had here was not just even was a concerted effort by capital to demonize elements of what was going on because it was empowering workers too much. They were demanding higher wages. They were getting higher wages. The rate of wage increases for the lowest income 20% in this country went up at a rate that we haven't seen in years. You saw people voluntarily leaving employment. That number went high. That's an indication of worker confidence. That was what became the greatest of alarms there, was that they were losing the dynamic. And that is exactly the story that Ezra Klein pretends doesn't exist. Because in his mind, the ability for government to provide benefits is encumbered by other entities, whether it's environmentalists or the groups.
But that's not even benefits, Sam. That's like what he's talking about. The groups are basically people that are getting in the way of more private construction of housing. That's when he blames them, which is not
they make this
government benefit.
In that book, they make this the overarching. He just laid it out there. I mean, in that conversation with Dothau, he's not talking about zoning restrictions in San Francisco. He's talking about two visions of politics.
Yes.
One is this sort of like undescribed limit on state capacity, like government is just like constraining itself for no reason. And then the other, which he says is sort of like, simplistic, is that there's money in oligarchs, and as soon as they go away, everything's going to be fine. Now, of course, he oversimplifies as that dynamic, but we have a real life experience over the past couple of years where we had an expansion of benefits by government. Government clearly had the capacity, and then a retrenchment. And the retrenchment comes not from environmentalists, not from unions, not from all the groups. It comes from big money.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to basically say that it's insincere. Because, okay, perhaps you can make that case about the construction of new apartments in specific circumstances, but that is a very narrowly tailored argument for the examples that they describe. Because if you apply that same logic to things like government benefits, you are back to 1990s neoliberal austerity politics, which is what he represents. But he's being insincere about it, and he's being evasive about it. And when you're talking about something like housing, which is such an acute problem at this moment, and it's never been more expensive, and people are spending up to 50% of their income on rent, if not more, which is entirely unsustainable, you can present arguments that are within a very narrow free market context to attack broadly the idea that government should be providing services for people, and we can do so by funding aggressively the government through a taxation policy on the wealthy. And that's what he talks around the entire time. So it's almost like when you make it about housing construction, it's a useful wedge for the rest of the kind of politics that he's trying to box out.
I think that's true. But I don't think the issue is that he would have no problem with taxing, with higher taxes on wealthy people. He would advocate for that. But what he is attempting to obscure is that there needs to be a recognition that the inhibition of government to provide for people is a function of interests that are unaligned with that project. And those interests are oligarchs and corporations. And so it's not just a question of taxing them to get the money to fund other things. It is a question of disempowering them in the context of society, disempowering them through antitrust, disempowering them through taxation, disempowering them through regulation, disempowering them by creating structures where, whether it's like disempowering creating fundamentally altering the tax structure so that board of directors aren't misaligned with and the C-suite is not misaligned with the mission of the company. There's a whole host of things that we can do to disempower oligarchs, but for him, some incremental increase in taxation on them is fine, but they want to obscure that for whatever reason, in part because he probably gets a lot of his support come from those people.
I mean, there's this tweet from a Moshe Temkin, and it galls me that he mentions all of these, Biden, I don't care, you go up Biden and Cuomo, wherever. How about Obama? Moshe Temkin writes, in 1933, the U.S. government facing an economic crisis caused by banks let the banks collapse and rescued the people, averting fascism. In 2009, the U.S. government facing an economic crisis caused by banks rescued the banks and let the people collapse. And here we are, my friends. Yep. Like, that is it. And we can't, why do we have an entire class of liberal commentators that seems avoidant of that realization?
Also, got to give credit. We had, I guess I was out, Sam, but you ended up having him on, Asted Herndon, in the wake of the 2024 election. Asted, who, from the New York Times, who had been on this.
Like a year ago.
Yeah, like a year ago. But just
yeah, months ago, I guess.
Yeah, when did I say? God, Jesus, time is flattening.
It's already fall.
But yeah, just like right after the election, because he had been, that's all what people were saying to him in his reporting going across the country after the COVID protections expired, and the payments and the child tax credit. Like, the fact that was not, there was cover up of that. And I think, when we look back on how we could have covered it differently too, like, there was just the cost of living thing.
Well,
what?
I mean, here's a tweet that I put out in 2023. It said,
nice plug.
Before you say the economy is good compared to the G7 or whatever, you have to state your income and monthly rent and mortgage. Right. And I have like 30 tweets on that. It was obvious to anyone, like, the economy, judged by metrics like, I don't know, that you see on CNBC, might have been fine. Nobody could afford rent.
Well, that's
we
what
went to an election like it.
Man, and in the run up to the, that summer where they were talking about the economy doing well, I mean, I think we were, we didn't have the data that we have now, but there is no doubt that wealth inequality made the actual numbers that we were seeing less relevant as a measure of how the economy is doing, because you have an increasingly smaller group of people who have the ability to move those indicators in one way or another. And it becomes maybe a sense of how the economy is doing in terms of like money, but not in terms of people, because fewer people have more of that money. So the money may be moving around, but it's moving around fewer hands. And the
precarity of work has not been discussed enough, too, about the increasing reliance on the gig economy with very little protections, with people having to work gig jobs in supplementing their full-time jobs. Like, as much as it's very exciting to see so much of this unionization across the country. If you have a W-2, that's easier. But if you're somebody that's like working as a gig worker or an Uber driver or something, that is the underbelly of our economy. And it's the graph that you showed earlier, Sam, about all of the spending now being concentrated in the top 20%. Everybody else has nothing to spend.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.